I'm already here. And so I showed up and I just barged my way into that. And I ended up getting a contract. And it's a company I grew up watching. And it's one of the best in the world. When 18 at 30 was working professionally in some of the top professional ballet companies in the world. And he looked at me and said, I've decided to close it. Like, I have a few months to find a job. And I was on an O1 visa at the time, which it's a wrap. I thought he was over it. I had very little empathy at the time. I thought, how is this happening to me? Even though you think you're special in this moment of deceit, you're not. People get fired every day. They get kicked out of the country. You're going to be fine. And I think in that moment, her belief in me that there was possibility was so intense, but it was also like, get out of your emotional self right now. We have to get down to it. Like she'd mention, when she calls someone, people answer the phone, but she's in textbook. She was just like willing to help immediately with no questions asked.
What kind of help are you always willing to give?
Like professional ballet is pretty cutthroat. Whereas in business, like if you make money, people are like, oh, you're legit. They don't care. They're like, revenue, amazing. So I felt like, am I allowed to be here all the time?
Hey, Ashley, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. Excited to record this podcast.
Yes. Happy 2024.
Last time we talked, it was in a whole different context. Or the Alistair's place, and he just finished the conference he throws personally.
Ballet.
And it was a great time. And I remember talking to you and your company, and I'm not going to give it away. I'll let you talk about it. But I was always excited to reconnect.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. That was a milestone 3 days of learning and a milestone Friday at the end. So stay tuned to connect.
Awesome. Actually, for the folks that don't know you, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Ashley Werhun. I'm a startup founder of a company called Montreal. My career was sort of atypical. I was a professional ballerina for 10 years. Started training professionally at 11. And so it's a pretty focused young start. When 18 to 30 was working professionally in some of the top professional ballet companies in the world. And then I made the obvious step into tech and started Montreal, which did a huge pivot in itself. So that's been a journey, and I'm excited to find a dead end into it. It's all about mentorship, and so I'm sure I'll overlap a little bit with like the idea of helpfulness.
You're encouraging people to give back. You're encouraging folks to help. But the fact that you actually have a platform for folks to help others in problems they probably aren't even defining well. That's brilliant. How did you move from professional ballerina to mentor network?
Yeah, I mean, I was always very interested in the business side of even ballet companies. So early on in my 20s, I was like brought into board meetings and kind of the development liaison. And at that level, board members are pretty high up. Like if you're on a board of a ballet company, you've given the health, you've given overseas, you've given education, and now you're giving to like arts. And so we had like, people that had spent 3 years at HP, who's now invested in Montreal actually on the board. We had people at Apple that was like an early employee who flies or flayed to the board meetings. So even the board meetings were just interesting to look at, what was our budget for the year? How we got paid? Why we got paid? So I was always interested in the inner workings instead of just kind of being the talent. So in that, I had a bunch of different like business side projects. But at the end of your career, you're like in your 30s, you're starting to hurt a lot. And you'd be on tour 7 months of the year. So there's a lot of downtime and like long plane rides and bus rides. And you're often in pretty obscure locations. And people would reach out to me all the time to ask like pretty life-defining questions like, should I go to Juilliard or should I join a company? Should I, pursue this as a lifelong goal? And I just didn't have like enough context to really dive in. And I just felt like they deserved more than like an emoji or like a one sentence reply. So I started to think about, how do we bridge that gap with people making these big life-changing decisions and not learning from the people that naturally would teach them, like a teacher, not to like demean that, but oftentimes the people that are in a teaching role are not doing the thing. They're not like building the company. If you're teaching entrepreneurship, you're often not out there running that company. And so I was starting to mold the idea of how do we get up and coming talent in touch with the people that are actually out there doing it. And in my case, like on that tour, I was in China on a bus. Like I just didn't know how we would do it if it wasn't kind of video based. So that was like the early idea of Metro, where you kind of came out of that need. And then I would get really driven by those conversations. I would give master classes and teach around the world. And it was starting to flip over in terms of the purpose of doing these 150 shows a year versus maybe helping the next generation. And it started to sort of tip over of what I was enjoying most. So when it kind of came time to build something, it felt natural, even though that path doesn't feel natural, I guess.
So I can only imagine the ebbs and flows you went through. But I want to ask this question. Tell me about a time where things were super tough and a lending hand showed up to take you out of it.
Ooh. I mean, to start, I'd never been like, I was born in Canada. Like, well, it's just been easy compared to a lot. So I've never had a time where I've been in physical danger. I guess the closest time to something sort of feeling existential was a company I was with for 6 years, and probably my 8th year in the US decided to close. And for anyone that's been through that, like your visa is attached to you being in the country legally. If you don't have a job, you cannot be in the country. And so I'm sure a lot of people feel this way after all the tech layoffs last year, like all these H-1B folks just got pulled to the extent that like Canada opened up that great program and scooped up 40,000 tech workers overnight. I thought that was brilliant. But at this time, I remember it was Christmas break. You would have 2 weeks off during Christmas break. If you're not doing that cracker, what you going to do? And I got a call from my director and said, can you come over for a quick meeting? So I went over to his house. Okay, it feels big, right? It doesn't feel like a check-in, but we do it back in season. And he looked at me, he said, I've always wanted this company to be ever evolving and ever flowing. And I started to get really nervous about to drop. And at the time, it was sort of this like poster child company where on the New York Times, we were told it in the hall, like we reached this pinnacle in like 4 years. So although an arts organization still feel like startup, it was like high growth. It was like, we were doing dance making shoots, and it was just sort of like the heyday of this thing that he built. And he kind of looked at me and said, I've decided to close it. And I sort of thought, okay, like what
Wow.
does that mean for well, right? Or guys, I have had, 6 years of my career. I'm a principal in the company. I did all the lead roles. And for other American dancers, it's like, okay, I'll get a new job. Now, jobs are not like abundant. Like normally if someone, they have to retire, yes, then maybe you have a child, they maybe get so injured that they leave, then a role opens up. It's not a job market like companies for all the time, right? There's a few companies in every country. And depending on the level that they're at, there's like very minute places. So your next role is not always clear. But he said, we're closing. And I thought it was a year or two out. And like kind of hands started getting so sweaty. He's like, oh no, we're closing in June. And so, all the auditions are kind of almost over. Like I have a few months to find a job. And I was on an O1 visa at the time, which it's a wrap. Like as soon as your employment is over, you're out of the country. I had lived in
Right.
my home in Edmonton, Alberta since I was 16 years old. I had left to go to professional ballet school. So it was just this moment where it felt like everything I'd put into it and spent an extended amount of time there, 6 years building that career, would sort of hold. And it was sort of a fight or flight moment. And so I kind of left, and I had very little empathy at the time. I thought, how is this happening to me? Now knowing what it's like to run a company and seeing friends wind down things, and it's so much bigger than that. And as if anything's happening that you can't handle, the right thing to do is to shut it down. So I have a very different perspective of the situation today. But at the time I was panicking. I had 6 months left on the visa. There was no job. That was obvious. And I was going to get out of the country. And I went into kind of out of emotional shaking mode into like, I need to get it together and like make a plan. But I didn't think that was really possible. And my rehearsal director at the time, Christina Johnson, and she's just this like legend. She was like the first Black ballerina ever to perform with the Royal Ballet. Like we think of Misty Copeland, but Christina was like the original pioneer in that. And she just said, come to my house. And I was like, okay. And I was just so in my emotions, like, how unfair is this? What am I going to do? And she's like, let's get into it. Let's make a list. Like, what are we doing here? It's December. You need to be out there January, February, March to audition. So she just started the list. And I think in that moment, her belief in me that there was possibility was so intense, but it was also like, get out of your emotional self right now. We have to get to work and like get down to it. So we made a list of people that she was willing to call that I was, maybe a good fit for. And she just wrote names and emails and just got into it. And she helped get me auditions in these places. And she came to my wedding a few months ago, and I just said, like, you're the region in Montreal. And she said, what? What are you talking about? And I said, well, like, I thought it was over. Like, the career was done. Maybe, and like, I only got this big role of like one person believing me one time. That will never happen again. I think that's kind of lives inside of all of that. So it's like, was this a chance thing that I'm successful? And you just got to work and you found it. And she goes, well, I didn't even introduce you to the Ballet Montreal is where I was in Montreal. And I said, it doesn't matter. It was the rolling stone that you said, we just start calling people like, you're going to be flying out every single weekend outside of your normal job. You'll be out on Saturday morning. You'll be back on Sunday. You'll have to ask for an audition at that weekend and you'll be back in the studio on Monday with us. And I'm like, you're the reason I met my husband because I would be in Montreal. And she was like, what are you talking about? But her help in that moment was so defining. And a lot of people from that company did go on to find like an immediate that up in their career. And I did. And it was because she was able to just like get me out of my emotions and then get me into action mode. And that lesson kind of has followed me through. I mean, a lot of ups and downs, both at a professional ballet career and at a startup where you're seeing existential threats maybe every quarter, maybe every week. So
So can you tell us more about this person? Like where did you meet her?
yeah.
What made you go to her at that
So
time?
she broke through the dance theater of Harlem, like these kind of pivotal moments in New York City of dance. She joined our company as a rehearsal director. So I guess in a normal job, it would be like your manager, and your basketball team would be like your coach. They're the owner, and then the director, and then the rehearsal director. So she's this leap between your boss and like the artist, but she's this interpersonal that would coach you every single day. And sometimes they can appear to be a boss and a little bit farther from you. I think because I was a principal dancer, there was like a mutual respect. I'd been there for so long, and as she joined, I was already there for 5 years. So she was laying low a little bit on the culture and how things work here, how to set the tone. And of course, I was thinking of her for other things. I think what happened in that moment was she was able to open up the vast, huge career that she had, like 30 years of experience or seeing this happen before. You're not the first persons, right? Like, even though you think you're special in this moment of deceit, you're not. Like, people get fired every day. They get kicked out of countries. Like, you're going to be fine. And then also her kind of expansive network was just like she'd been mentioned. Like, so when she calls someone, people answer the phone. She's not a new network to have. Like, she is like she's in textbooks. And so when she says, hey, I have something for you, much like in tech, right? There's like an immediate respect to say, okay, bring her in, even if it's not a good shot. I remember her bringing me into one place in the dance theater of Oregon. I went to the director after the audition. I was like, keep looking for my next step, exciting things after this new career. And he's like, well, it won't be here. And I was like, okay, so, and then just walked up to like, I was like,
Sure.
but in that moment, it was like, okay, this is not a good fit. That's bringing more clarity of what may be a good fit for me. So I'm going to edge away from that type of company in the next couple months. His time is limited. But yeah, she was just like willing to help immediately with no questions asked. I guess it was her job to do that, but not really, right? Like, it wasn't in her scope. When you get, let's say, fired or you leave the company, your manager can say those things like, happy to help you find your next bridge or whatever they say. And then they don't, or
Right.
people just don't ask, actually. I think people don't ask to say, okay, let's lip line up 10 to 20 places that might be a good fit. And she just dove in there with me.
How did you feel when she offered to help as it was manifesting? How did it feel for you?
It's not both to be like the chosen one, but also like I deserve this too. Kind of my whole career, I saw these people saying, "Oh, ask me if you need help," and like none of my peers would ask. And I would always book in meals and take a notebook and be like, "Let's get into this." Like, failure is not really an option. I'm very scared of failure, both from like a sunk cost place of eating in my first job. It was like I've been training in this for 20 years. My parents had everything to help me get here. Saying that's like I had a 8-year career. Can't I continue it? But I felt very like grateful and like I had a helping hand kind of with me and on each of these flights, even though I was just way going alone, like there was someone calling for me. Or I remember being in New York and she was like, call me after, let's see how it went, and call the director after. So it's a lot of like back channeling, as is a lot of the world, and a lot of people don't have resources to back channel for them. And
That makes
yeah,
sense.
and eventually I ended up in a great role, but it's scary when it's time framed. When you have X amount of months until you're out, or you have X amount of money in your runway, like when that time crunch is on, it can feel like the pressure increases as the time gets shorter. So I think you have to have a lot of trust that like, that you'll be able to figure it out.
How did you transition out of that situation? Like, how long did it take? But how was I'm assuming there was a roller coaster ride of it's working, it's not working, I'm done.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's going to be the best.
Yeah. There's levels, right? Like you said, the email, you get approval to come visit, take an audition, and then after, even within the day, you get little indications of you're in or you're more out. Some of it was like I was flying to Germany on our off week and I had to lie and say I was going home to Canada. And then I got to the airport and my passport was about to expire mid-flight, like that day. So I
Wow.
had to get an emergency
Oh, crap.
passport. And finally in the spring, a few months before my visa was up, I got an offer from Ballet in Montreal. And like that experience, it was not clear. Like they were taking class in Philadelphia. There's this unwritten rule of professional ballet. If you're a professional, you want to take class with the company you can take. So it's like, I don't know, it's G play. It's like if you're skating and you have a skate and you're a professional, let's say in NHL, and you say, hey, I'm in the town, can I skate with you? There's this like written rule to say, yeah, you come on and skate. So I called my friend Tara, who was leading the company, and she said, hey, we're in Philly. I know you're in New York right now. Do you want to come take? I said, that'd be great. I'm going to come, on stage before the show. And I was watching that. I don't think I've ever told it. I was walking backstage to take class and I looked at my email and it said like from the rehearsal director and I'd emailed him earlier and it was like, oh, class is really full. The dancers are really tired. It's end of tour. I don't think you can come. I was like, really? I'm like, I'm already here. And so he showed up and I went on to work with this person and he was like, he signaled to me like, who are you? And I was like, where I go? I don't know. Like I'm just on stage. And I just barged my way into that. And I ended up getting a contract there. And it's a company I grew up watching and it's one of the best in the world. So it ended up well. But even that, right? At the end, he was like, yeah, that was good. I know your former director, Jay McIntyre, like his work. Respect him. You must be tough to work with him. And I was like, I am. And then it was silence. And I said, okay, let me know. And I just kept emailing and finally said, hey, there's a women's role opening up in your position in the company. We'd like you to join. So, but yeah, it's not clear. Like success is very not clear. It's not addressed. It's not like it feels more like fundraising, to be honest. Like your weeks in,
Yeah.
there's a maybe not. There's like a vibe. Oh, I think that person liked me and it meant nothing. Maybe they were just really nice. And then all of a sudden it just kind of like, comes together and it always feels like this, yes, that you did deserve, but you've been putting in more, week over week.
So you end up in Montreal. I'm fast forwarding. You end up in Montreal and new city. I lived in Montreal. Like we met in
Mhm.
Montreal. I moved back to Toronto mid last year. This is 2024 now. But as a Torontonian going to Montreal, like there was a little bit of an adjustment that I needed to go through. How was that for you? New city, new company, and then you transition to tech. I just have so many questions. So I'll let you
Yeah,
run with
I'd
them.
always moved to cities without, like, a lot of people move to cities with universities or a purpose or a job. I'd always moved without that. So, like, I moved to San Francisco at age 18 to go to ballet school without, like, a student visa. We can talk about that later. It was legal at the end. I moved to different cities for contracts. I never had something. The purpose was the job. So I didn't mind. Like, I knew that I would be in my job and meeting people through that. You're on tour again 6 to 7 months of the year. So you don't really feel seated in the city. You don't feel like it's home necessarily for, I would say, 5 to 6 years because you're just not there enough. So for me, it was just in my role, I sort of saw it as a test. Like if I like it after one season, I'll stay. We're on annual contracts. If not, I go for something else. It felt great to be back in Canada. It was very familiar. It felt without the language. I mean, I didn't speak French at all, but it felt familiar. Like there was no time frame. What if I lost my job? I can stay here. Like I'd still have healthcare. Like this is safety for me. Like this is absolute safety to be back in Canada. So it didn't feel like that big of an adjustment. The transition into tech, people were really nice. I know that Isaac Sweeney said to come on this podcast that people like him, like you just walk into the Nutmeg House and be like, hey, what are you building? And I didn't know anything. Like I didn't know what a venture capital was. I didn't know what product market fit was. Like I just didn't know anything. And so I have some recordings of meetings with advisors back then. And I just think like how did they sit with me and how were they so kind to me? I didn't know anything. Like, I don't know if I would have helped me back then, but they just sat and listened. Like LP Morris, he's the founder of Best Bud, right? He sat with us and had us pitch to him and that, oh, you're a little bit more outgoing. I feel like you're maybe the CEO role. And I was like, okay, like I didn't know anything. And so I think the nice thing about entrepreneurship, like it's pretty permissionless. Like you just start something and it's pretty objective. Like professional arts, even sport is pretty subjective. Like you'd have to have someone that believes in you and sort of like picks you to do it. There's a barrier. You have to be drafted. You have to get a contract. And only like 1% of all people that do that get it. It's very subjective. Whereas in business, like if you make money, people are like, oh, you're legit. Like they don't care. They're like, revenue, amazing. Like, how did you get that? Right? Like they care even less about the standard of your product because they know you're going to get there one day. And so it was very permissionless. So I felt like, am I allowed to be here all the time? And then we have customers and we'll launch our first product and people were reviewing it. Yes, I'm here. But people were very kind and the culture in tech I found to be really curious compared to professional ballet was like the ability to help and say, yeah, I'll just help you. Like professional ballet is pretty cutthroat. Like people, I think it's changing, but it's not often that someone that can like guide the way for you. Like they're focused on their own career. So it sounds very like full of those, help and openness, which I wasn't, I really,
That's actually that warms my heart.
it's really
That
nice.
actually
Yeah.
warms my heart.
People will take your call. They'll make intros. I wonder where that came from.
Whenever I speak to a person who wants to be a founder, just want to try something, and they're always asking for resources. This is a fun bit. Like they're like, "Is there a resource?" And you could be like, "Yeah, well, read this book or read the other one." The shocking thing I always mention, and they're surprised until they're not, is that startup people are pretty open. Just message us wherever you're finding us. Say something heartfelt, and be like, "I need help. I need advice." And, the ones that don't do it still keep asking the same question over and over again. But the ones that stop did it and then they believe. It's like you have to try it. So you have to step into the fear and then notice that it wasn't really real.
Definitely. And I had the opposite. I had a great friend now, Neha Baldwin. She built and sold many companies, works for Microsoft. And he messaged me on Twitter and was like, I always sort of wanted to build something like Naturally. How's it going? And I was like, he was like a rock star of the tech world. And I was literally nobody. I was like, it's going pretty well. Do you want to have a call? It said, sure. And we've kept in touch, but there's just this like open curiosity of what are you building? I had a thought for that. I didn't really dive into it. Is it something? Is it nothing? Like the market didn't accept that 10 years ago. Is now the right time? It's very outside of yourself, right? It's like these ideas live on their own and we will like thrust them into the world. And I hope that you win because there's like this opportunity. Whereas I think my former career was all about you and your talent in a sort of limited world. So I think it's at the most not only ambitious, but like hopeful path you can be on. And it feels hopeful all the time.
Tech or, tech/startup, whatever label you want to give it, it's implicitly utopian.
Yeah.
At least that's how I see it. It's like we wouldn't be building things if we're like, it's going to all go to shit. You all believe it's going to get better and cooler and more interesting and grander. So like, all right, I'll build something super tiny to move along that path.
Yeah, totally.
That's why I enjoy like being in tech and startups.
Totally.
So with your journey from Mentorly, from the start of Mentorly until now, how's that been going? I can just only imagine just like startups are never linear. There's always a lot of plummeting up and down.
Yeah.
So how's that been going? How has help showed up for you during this? Who are some folks you'd want to thank?
Yeah. I mean, I think the last 4 years for startup founders have been like extremely peaks and valleys. Like you had COVID. It was like,
Yeah.
is my team safe? Is everyone okay? And then, okay, now there's a ton of money in the system. Okay, I guess we'll raise. And then, the market sort of starts crashing, especially in SaaS. So it's been a very,
Now there's no money in the
there's no
system.
money in it, but we better be profitable. And so it's been a journey. So we launched and we were a consumer-facing company because it was driven from that personal experience of what if this existed for everyone. And then we found out that a lot of these mentorship programs existed, but they sort of operated well and not a lot of people were getting the outcome that they wanted out of them. The people running them were equally just disappointed. So now we really focus on helping programs run, and we provide like the backend software so that large programs can run, which is really exciting because you unlock one customer and all of a sudden now you have 10,000 sessions that you were acquiring, with every ad spend of your money. So in that way, I think we found the right market. Um, when I think about existential moments, some of those are covered under NDA, but I do remember going through a scenario. It was negotiation, and it was just my first time that I'd ever been through something like that. And my investor, Vic, he runs CVM, and he started his company, I think, out of college project. And for the last 15 years, has built it up into this giant company. And he was like, "Oh, I've seen this before. It's going to be a little messy. Let's get into it." And he would just answer my text. And the same feeling of that time constraint, it was like, how do we get this done as fast as possible? And I think your relationships with your investors ebb and flow. Sometimes they respond to your updates, sometimes not. Sometimes when things get really hard, you dive into it. And we were just on the texting cadence, and he would say, I said, "Can you talk tonight?" He goes, "Not really. My kids are sick, and call me after 9:30." So we put everyone down, and then we get on a call and kind of edit out. And what was amazing is like, sure, he's an investor. That's his job, is to bring quote unquote value, but like he's running his own company, has young children at home. He does not need to be texting and literally walking us through every single stage of the deal that he did. And I think like the nicest thing in those hard moments is investors and advisors just saying like, "Oh, I went through this and yours isn't even like the half is that, or I went through this and it was 10 times the money." I think just saying that out like and saying, "You are not alone. I've been through something similar." I would hang up the phone and just have value then to say, "Okay, I'm not alone. This happened often. I'm not the unique person struggling in this moment. I can figure this out. It will be sorted." Is like enough mentorship for me. On top of that, they go really granular and they get into like, deal flow and all that kind of stuff. But I think just like the message that you are not alone, people have helped me with constantly. My good friend Kyle Bulba, he was a CEO in Montreal, and he walked me through every single step of the fundraise. And just to have a sounding board, I think in mentorship is really important. Like the person is not always going to provide you answers, but it's often quite lonely, especially if you're building something from nothing that's have never existed in the world. Like, that it's going to be lonely, but you don't think it will be. And I just reveled in looking at big companies today where that got started somehow out of nothing. Isn't that incredible? I think we're like, bro, it's Bell. I'm like, I know, but some person early would like, what if we had hella of church? And yeah, so just having that sounding board, and that's what we aim for at Mentorly too, is just getting people to match with it, have conversations, to say it out loud, to say the hard things out loud and say, "Hey, I'm nervous," or "I don't know what the next step is." And maybe, the person on the other end can share a story of what they've been through, maybe how they've thought about it, and not necessarily giving the answers. But yeah, it's certainly been full of peaks and valleys, and I'm sure it will be. I think the nice thing about being a founder is every month or every quarter, it's like the person you were is no longer needed. You have to be someone new, right? Like you've reached X revenue. Now you're a founder of this size of company with this revenue, with this size team. Or now there's a new market and the rules have changed and we need to like focus in and be profitable. Now you have to be this person. And so you have to kind of come out of your label for yourself and say, "Okay, this is what's required of me today."
So you talked about founder loneliness, that it's always predicted, but we hope it's still there. For folks that are experiencing this and have no idea how to actually come out of it, do you have a few pointers?
I think a lot of that feeling is being at a level of commitment to your craft that a lot of people are not. So I don't think it's unique to founders alone. I think it's unique to people that are putting most of the hours of the day into something that other people don't. And that's okay. I think in my journey, I was used to that from like a teenager. It was like not having social time, rather trying to focus on this one thing. So I think finding people, whether it's friends or other founders, that also do it and normalize it. Not necessarily like sending your guts out to them, but just knowing that like they're also working at 8 p.m. or you text them like, "Oh, how did it go with that client?" To feel like there's also either struggle or triumph on the other end. It doesn't need to be an exceptionally long relationship because I don't think you have to dedicate hours in your week to necessarily have all the lunches and dinners. I at least haven't found that balance yet, but I have a few founders friends that we have texts and it's just like, yo, how did it go? Like, I know that you were struggling in this deal. How did it turn out? Or can you hop on a quick call? And to the extent, like, with one of my friend Gabrielle have this gift, and it's like when you're upgrading and when you're raising, we'll send a gift on either side of like, how are you feeling today? And some will be like a mummy with like oxygen, like horrible. And then other will be like throwing cash everywhere because the exchange are that high. So I think having a few friends that you can kind of text that are on the same journey is really important. And then I think getting like some professional outlets is really important. I found that like dumping that amount of stress on your spouse or your friends that don't really know startups is not that helpful because actually your time with them should celebrate the other parts of you that are awesome, right? Like maybe you just want to go for a swim with some friends or things like that. Don't bring it all because it's not going to help. Like it's not helping the scenario. It's not solving it. And so feeling those other sides of yourself. So I'd say like a good therapist or, a yoga practice or somewhere that you can go internalize some of that stuff so that you can come back to your team full and not doing so long.
So this is a problem I personally struggle with all the
You
time.
do.
Like, I jokingly say I work with friends and I hang out with work
Yeah.
folks. Like, it's startup stuff. Everything's intertwined.
Yeah.
Like, Isaac that you mentioned lived a couple of blocks from me, and when I was in Montreal, and he was one of the two reasons I moved to
Woohoo.
Montreal. We never worked with each other, but like he was a VC, I was a founder. Like it was a whole different thing. I want you to elaborate. How do you keep work and not work life separate so the stress doesn't just take over by osmosis?
I don't believe in work-life balance because I've never had a lot of separation, but I do believe in taking a look at like your identity and your value and knowing that if your company ended tomorrow or if your career ended or you broke your leg or like if you have a career that's based on that, which can end like that, is like you would be okay and you would have value in the world. And that's often really hard to remember in self-worth because you think, well, what else would I do? And it's like, we are not what we do. I know that our society is built around that, but like there is value in who you are. And so I'm trying to think of like exercises. I'm such a nerd about all of them, but like I think the journey of like, becoming a professional athlete or being a founder for me is it's getting to know yourself through this process is kind of the work and I'm loving that process. And so like in building a startup, I labeled myself as, oh, maybe I'm like really, I don't know if it's left or right brain, but really artistic, really athletic, and maybe I'm not and less concerned, or my brain's not compute. I don't know. So it's like objective numbers and stuff, but I can, and that's like the beautiful process of like, no, I can be quite analytical. I have that capacity, and also I have this really artistic side where I do need to like seal big feelings, and if I don't do things that tap into that, I'm gonna feel horrible and dead inside. So okay, I do have the capacity. Let's lean into that. I'm like, that's the startup. It's definitely about success and it's definitely about like, I hope we get a huge return for our investors and make a bunch of success. But I think it also like, I think we choose paths to get curious about what's inside of us and what are we capable of. And I think if we had no limits of the world and everyone had the same starting ground, everyone would be capable of everything. And I'm lucky enough to like be able to have my own company in this wild world that we live in and have that be the biggest stress of life or what, I don't know, a customer canceled or an employee is complaining. It's like, that's very solvable. I think the personal journey of being on it though is like very interesting. Like the work is young. Like it's cool to have this huge thing blow up and be like, now I know how to negotiate a huge legal outcome. I would have never known that. And it's hard to have that perspective. But like, I think looking at your growth over time, like, it's just outstanding. Like, if we looked at who you were 10 years ago, like, this is outstanding where you are. That can be sort of like a positive lens that I carry on a little bit too much, but I just think it's outstanding. Like, if someone's founding something and willing to not go the route of getting a big, safe job at a company and build something from scratch, like, the courage to do that is amazing and to keep cultivating that. Like what you and I are saying, it's what we want to see in the world. We want to see people that resentment will come into this path day after day, sometimes with no real payback within the near future, but maybe in 10 years. So I just think that journey has been really fulfilling for me. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
I'm happy to hear you did answer it, but I'm really happy to hear that the journey has been fulfilling for you. The Some of the answers I've jotted down, some of the interesting ones. There's this Eastern philosopher called Warhun. He talks about the achievement culture. Like, first of all, achievement culture makes us narcissists. Like we are, and none of this is bad. It's just talking about it objectively. That we become the heroes in single person cast movie, and it's just us versus everyone else. This can be good as long as it doesn't take over everything. I've read a few things of his and I've had discussions over it. From his point of view, one way to not have the two lives bleed into each other is to shut off the achievement need, the need for achievement kind of thing, the need for accomplishment. And like, I'm not an artist. This cooking and just like hip hop dancing are probably the most artistic things I would do. But you're not really looking to win at yoga. It's not a competitive sport. You know what I mean? You're not looking to win at this dish. It just needs to be nice. The need to win, there's no achievement there. There's no steps for the people that got medals. Doing those activities just to be able to context switch. That's one of the answers that like I'm still digesting. It's still half baked in my head. The other ones, there's the one thing around like dopamine baseline. It's like get bored. I have a hard time
Digital.
with this. I have very severe ADHD, and like getting bored is death to me. So like I just can't do that. Like I'll meditate for days. That's fine. But to me, that's something. It's not being bored. And then the third one, which I think is easier for some and not for others, is to take focus off of yourself and be curious about someone else. That's pretty tough if you're just immersed into a problem that is very tough for you. It's like, oh my God, like zero catch position is coming close and I need to make sure bank has some juice in it. I've been searching for the answer to this. I don't have it. I'm bad at it. But I love that you touched on your method of it.
I think the achievement one is one that I cannot do. I mean, I turned every hobby into a career. Like the achievement one is not something I can do well. Like I think if you're not doing it to the end of your degree at the being the best, I don't know why you're doing it. Is sort of a position I have. But I think the idea of ego within that is really interesting. So like if you are like the vessel of this really important work, it means that your capacity is unlimited because it's not about you and it's not about your limitations. It's about like how much or how fast can you bend and change depending on what's needed. It's actually not about you. And in business, I think that's especially true because like all you want is to talk to your customers. Like you're not necessarily solving your own problem. Maybe in that first ideation meeting you were, but not when you're delivering something. So I think the more it becomes about you and your satisfaction or how well you think you're doing, it's probably going to reflect so poorly on the business. You can be really focused on your cash position and growing that because you're helping so much because it just keeps growing. Like that is the ceiling of momentum you want to have, and nothing really has to do with you, especially as a leader. Like I'm not coding. I just closed one out at 2 sales last week, but the other 3 were my team. And so I think from a leadership perspective, we get too about ourselves as founders too. It's to humble because a person can only do so much. So
I appreciate that. So what kind of help are you always willing to give?
I think I'm always willing to listen. And if I can be helpful, I sound like I'm used to now. If I can be helpful, let you know. If I have some sort of background in which I could shed some like light on a topic, I will share it. I will probably preface it with like, this may not apply to you. This is what I found. And if I don't have any information on the topic, hopefully I can make a connection with the person. So I just came back from San Francisco and I was around some founders in like biotech and other areas that I know nothing about. But we were talking about things that were fundamentally like founder-based journeys. And with that, we can go in all day and support each other of how we're finding our paths. Sometimes I'm really willing to connect people outside to my network, but I think there's a little internal vetting process you do just like Christina did to me, is this person good enough for me to recommend? You don't just recommend people everywhere for everything because you want to be kind of discerning in yourself and your judgment as well. So those are sort of guidelines I have. I do join 2 to 3 mentorship programs that we run for our customers every year because they ask me, like some of the programs focus on female founders or some focus on Canadian entrepreneurs. And they're like, you'd actually be a great fit for the program. And I always join. And that you don't have discernment. You answer questions around what you're willing to give. They match you based on algorithm and you show up to a call. And I love that because it's kind of like blind dating. Like you don't know much about the person, you've read about their company, and they come to you every couple of weeks with just general questions. And more than not, you have some meaningful exchange. And I and all of our mentors walk away with a huge amount of kind of gratitude for that experience, and also like a reminder that we know some things. Like when you're constantly pushing yourself as an entrepreneur, you're always becoming someone else, and so you forget that you're good at anything. And sometimes when when you give back, maybe helpful, you say, "Oh gosh, I do have something about this. Okay, I'm doing a good job too." But that's sort of like the unexpected benefit of giving back.
I appreciate it. Ashley, thanks a lot for coming on the podcast. I'm really grateful for you to share your story and all the names that came up. I took a lot of notes. So I want to thank you for being here. Hopefully we get to hang out sometime.
For sure. I would love that. Thanks for having me.